বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি।
Hello everyone, welcome to the Hindu analysis for 7th June 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Punjab, Tamil Nadu and Kerala top education index ranking. So to gauge the quality and level of education that is being given in different states, the Educational Ministry comes out with an performance grading index every year. So yesterday, the Educational Ministry came out with its latest performance grading index for the year of 2019 to 2020. According to this index or this report, Punjab, Tamil Nadu and Kerala have all scored higher than 90% in the indexing. Now, what are the parameters that the Ministry of Education or the Education Ministry monitors to come out with this index? These are, particularly it is not only relegated to the states, it is also done to the union territories also. So to monitor the progress of how the states and union territories are doing in the field, in the domain of school education, they study the learning outcomes, access and equity, infrastructure, facilities, governance and management processes. These are the indicators or the primary indicators that the Ministry of Education monitors and calculates to come out with the index itself. So as I said earlier, only 3 states, that is Punjab, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, have scored higher than 90% in this index. Now the PGI score, as it is called, you can clearly see from the map itself that Punjab has scored 929 points and Tamil Nadu 900, Kerala 906 in Tamil Nadu and 901 in Kerala. But you can clearly see that Bihar has scored only 747, lagging behind is Telangana with 772 points. So in this particular year that this performance grade index was calculated, Punjab has seen a high record for highest jump in scores out of 1000 points. So last year it scored 769 points. This year Punjab has scored 929 points, which is a huge increase in terms of yearly basis. So for this article, we have to see who were the highest scorers, that is Punjab, Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Kerala had downgraded, lost its few points because last year also it scored higher than the 901 that we are seeing this year. Gujarat has been the next big loser in terms of the points that they lost, because they lost from 2nd rank to 8th rank this year. So again, for this we have to consider what are the parameters. To repeat again, the parameters that Education Ministry considers for the performance grade index is learning outcomes, access and equity, infrastructure and facilities and governance and management processes. Moving to the next article, since February pact, all quiet on line of control. So it has been 100 days since both India and Pakistan made a commitment to adhere to the 2300 ceasefire agreement between both the countries. If you remember, on February 24th or 25th, both the commander level communication level officers spoke on phone and agreed that they are going to adhere to 2003 ceasefire agreement. It has been 100 days since that commitment was made by both sides, and from the ground reports it has been clearly seen that there has been no infiltration attempts so far, no reported infiltration as well. And one of the officers who was on the ground said that though we are not seeing any infiltration bits or infiltrations, officially confirmed infiltrations, what we are seeing is no reduction in the number of terror launch pads that dot along the line of control. Now, as far as the data that Army has, last year alone there were over 4,600 ceasefire violations and only 592 this year till the commitment came into effect on February 25. From January 1st to February 24th or 23, Pakistan has committed 592 ceasefire violations, and the last year number was staggering 4,600 ceasefire violation. So for the comparison, till June 1st, 2020, there were only 1,531 ceasefire violations. Despite no infiltration bids, no ceasefire violations, one thing that has been continuing is smuggling across the border. Since there are several villages ahead of the LOC fence, the officials for the last 100 days have made significant seizures in terms of narcotics, IEDs, improvised explosive devices, IED materials, grenades and pistols. So we are clearly seeing that though they are adhering to the ceasefire pact, they haven't stopped smuggling or getting arms and ammunition into India. Now, one of the reasons that can be attributed to why they are not seeing many infiltration bids, not about the ceasefire aspect of it, only the infiltration aspect of it is winter in Jammu and Kashmir, which makes the terrain impossible to trek or move. So every year it has been understood that during winter months the infiltration bids always go down. But with global warming and rise in temperatures, earlier the areas which were inaccessible due to adverse weather conditions are now becoming little bit accessible. So the army has also increased vigil along these areas. Again, the officers on the ground again report that we have to be very careful because in the next few months summer is going to set in the high altitude areas, and it has been always tracked that during summer the infiltration bids always go up exponentially. This is where we have to wait and see whether Pakistan will hold to the ceasefire agreement, because the modus operandi of the Pakistan Rangers in that sectors is simple. Whenever there is an infiltration bid, they start firing, they start sniper firing, they start mortar shelling, and they start shelling in that areas. They use these tactics as a cover for these infiltrators to get in, because they want to engage the BSF at the fence, so that when the BSF is engaged in retaliating, these terrorists get into India through the fence or tunnels in most of the cases. So it's a mix and match of both tactics. But one thing that has been established well now by this point of time is Pakistan Rangers use shelling and mortars and firing as a cover to infiltration attempt. So that has been the modus operandi of Pakistan Army till now. So if the Pakistan Army is really committed to the ceasefire agreement of 2003, it directly implicates that they are also going to not use shelling or firing or a ceasefire violation as a tactic or a cover to get the terrorists into Indian territories. But we have to wait and see how this will play out. Now the second aspect of the terror part of Jammu and Kashmir, or the unstable security part of Jammu and Kashmir, is local recruitment into terror organizations. The number has been a little bit high since the death of Burhan Wani, because the events surrounding his death and the post Martyrdom or the PR that was given to his particular death by both security agencies of Pakistan and the terror agencies operating out of J&K was so huge that since his death, it can be clearly seen that there has been a certain increase in percentage of local recruitment. Now, since last year, they have forces on the ground have only seen partial reduction in local recruitment compared to last year. In the year 2019, there were 119 local students, kids, employed people who joined terror outfits, and in the case of 2020, it was only 166. So if you remember correctly, one of the tactics that was adopted by our security forces to stem the flow of local kids and youth into terror organizations was the turnaround time for their either capture or neutralization. Remember, during one phase of 2020 and 2019 particularly, the turnaround time, meaning the time the person joined the terror organization and the time that he was either captured or neutralized, was brought down to 10 to 15 days, because they were so effective in using intelligence, local intelligence and cordon and search area tactics, that these people were left out with no other option but to surrender sometimes. And one thing that you have to notice that since few years back, the army has also employed a new tactic to let these kids, youth, mostly youth who are educated and misguided by whatever the propaganda that is run up there. They are employing family members, friends and local authorities to speak and communicate through loud speakers, asking for their surrender so that they will be rehabilitated via government sources. In most cases it is working, because when parents and the family members of the terrorists are communicating with him through loudspeakers and asking him to lay his arms down and come and surrender to the security forces, in most cases it has been working, but the success rate is little bit low. But you have to implement new methods so that these kids don't get killed in action, because they don't understand the entire concept of what is going on right now. So most of it is propaganda, brainwashing, as the army puts it. And since this tactic of getting the family members to the area where the terrorists are holed up and communicating with them, asking them to lay down the arms, has been working to great numbers. Moving on to the next article, new rules only to check misuse of social media. Now, we are well aware that there is a tussle going on between the IT rules that were implemented or the guidelines brought in by the central government and social media platforms and digital media platforms. The main contention is between what Twitter is saying and what Twitter is doing and what WhatsApp is doing and what WhatsApp is trying to implement in terms of its new privacy policy. In that, IT and Law Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad has said that the new rules would benefit 100 crore users who are using such platforms by giving them a means to address their grievances. He is saying that the new rules are only brought in to check the misuse of social media and not to control any aspect of it. So his stance was, any robust democracy which allows freedom of speech and expression must also allow a forum for readdressal of complaints, which is a valid point nonetheless. So again, the stance seems to be that these are private companies, should adhere to Indian laws from where they are operating, despite their irrespective of their origin. Again, the argument seems to be based on the fact that these companies are from America. They're trying to kind of dictate what the government should do in terms of their operating procedures, and what they're trying to define the laws of the land, which they don't have the right to begin with. So that is where most of the contention comes from. If they have any objections to it, they had ample time to raise those issues, and they have legal judicial platforms to raise those issues. But instead, they are neither conforming to the new laws nor they are replying to requests from the government of India. So they are trying to do something which falls into the illegal area of the social structure or the judicial structure. Again, the government is very intent and serious about to bring these laws into existence, and they have brought in major social media companies have conformed to the laws. They have ensured that they are going to agree with the laws, and they are going to implement the laws in a very short period of time. But the only agencies that are struggling with it are the Twitter and the WhatsApp. So again, we have to wait and see how this thing plays out, because the judiciary is also involved at this point of time, and you cannot speculate as to what the judiciary will do. Moving on to the next article, the red flags on trail of the virus. So this editorial particularly talks about the lab leak theory that has gained traction in the last few months, when the US President Biden and various other countries have ordered their independent probes into the origin of the COVID-19 virus, or had requested for a relook into or reinvestigate the origin of the virus. Now, it is well established by this point of time that there was a collusive cover-up for the possible leak of the novel coronavirus from the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, since the beginning of the pandemic, as I said earlier, there were a certain group of scientists who were promoting this lab leak theory, but they were shunned, they were silenced, and they were threatened with severe consequences from certain groups of scientific society and from the China as well. Since the initial phases of coronavirus spread or transmission from China to other countries, China promoted the narrative that the virus spread was from a wet market, that is Wuhan wet market, and tried to avoid any scrutiny as to what was being done in the Wuhan Institute of the Virology. Since the beginning of the pandemic, China has been trying to misdirect countries, investigation agencies, and any person who was looking into the origin of the virus away from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and they were putting on various markers down to confuse or misdirect people who are researching into it. Now it soon became public that the coronavirus related research was being done in Wuhan Institute of Virology was partially or directly funded from Americans. Now there was this proposition that Dr. Fauci, who heads the gain of research function in the world, was the allocator of these funds to a scientist in America, who then subsequently outsourced the job to another scientist who was doing the same research in Wuhan Institute of Virology. So there was this period during the pandemic when people were proposing or suggesting the lab leak theory, but many experts who knew about how viruses evolve, how viruses mutate, and so on and so forth, instead of looking into the facts of the issue here, they embraced the natural spread narrative, since the alternative was unimaginable. Just because it was not just because they couldn't comprehend with the fact that it is possible, they chose to ignore the science and went ahead with the natural spread theory despite what the evidence was suggesting. Now, when I speak to certain friends who are currently working in US media houses and other such locations, one of the reasons that they gave me why social media companies and certain media houses, almost all major media houses in US, discredit the lab leak theory was that simply because it was being proposed by then US President Donald Trump and his Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Now, when you look back last year and compare the reporting that was being done by the so-called mainstream media in United States and what the independent media in United States was doing, you can clearly see a difference there. Just because Donald Trump and his secretary and his team or his White House team was promoting the lab leak theory, the narrative was so quickly shifted from the lab leak theory to racism was in a split second. The media, which was supposed to do its due process in investigating any accusation, they simply chose to ignore the facts and termed the idea that this lab leak theory was possible as a racist idea, just because from where it was coming from, despite what the CDC chief during that time was saying. The CDC chief at the time in the US was a top-notch virologist and a world-renowned virologist. When he came out and said that, guys, look, whatever the data that I'm seeing particularly regarding this virus, it's simply not possible for this to have a zoonotic transmission, meaning from animals to humans in a natural way. This virus was tampered with in the lab, and that's the only way that I'm thinking as to why this virus is so highly transmissible. When he came out and said that, just because he was working for the Trump presidency and Trump White House, he was quickly discredited, he was called a racist, and he was cancelled as such. We call it now. You understand the cancel culture of US society. So he was immediately cancelled just because he was working for the Trump presidency. Now, after 1 year of unimaginable death and devastation, now these people who said that it was not possible and it was racist for it to be a lab leak conspiracy theory, now they are saying that there is a possibility that the virus indeed came out from Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, as recently as yesterday, a few emails leaked from the US head, that is Dr. Fauci himself, stating that he is not going to propose or promote the lab leak theory for whatever his own personal reasons. So you look at how media gets caught up in the ideological battles that they forget to report the facts. That is what we have to strive to avoid in our country also. But that is for another discussion. But coming back to the lab leak theory that we are facing with us right now, again to reiterate, the lab leak proposition was discredited as conspiracy theory simply because it was being exposed by then US President Donald Trump and his Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Now, it can be understood that with advances in biotechnology, it is now possible to genetically create or genetically engineer existing pathogens to make them more lethal and difficult to treat. This is what the author observes from his own personal experience. He also states that higher mortality and ethnic specificity could be other features of such new synthesized organisms or virus. So what he's saying is a virus can be modified to attack a specific ethnic group with high mortality rate. So in essence, he's talking about creating a bioweapon. He's saying that with the existing technology and with existing understanding of genetic engineering, labs such as Wuhan Institute of Virology can create viruses and synthesize organisms that can target specific ethnicities with high mortality. And the people who, as far as the vaccine for these viruses which are lab created, the only people who can create an antidote to this virus are the people who are conducting the research on this and created the virus in the first place. So it's like you are creating a bioweapon for which there is no antidote, and if there is an antidote, it is with you. No other country can prepare the antidote because you created it, so you also create the kill code for it. So it becomes a bioweapon with immense devastation and value attached to it. Now coming back to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, it's a biosafety level 4 facility, meaning it has the most deadliest virus in its lab for research purposes. When the US inspectors conducted a audit a few years back, they found serious violations of safety norms, and they even suggested the lab be closed at one point of time. Because during the 2018 inspection by the US inspectors, they clearly reported in that report, if you read the report, you can find all the lack of safety precautions that these Wuhan Institute of Virology lacked. You can clearly say that who allowed this lab to be operational in the first place, because they had no proper procedures to depose anything, they had no proper procedures to handle deadly viruses. All these wrongs that they found, they clearly said that the facility did not have any appropriately trained professionals to safely operate the lab itself. Whoever the working there, they weren't even qualified to work at that biosafety level 4 lab. In addition to that, Israeli intelligence agencies and Israel has officially came out and said that they have linked the Wuhan Institute of Virology to Chinese biological weapons program. So it is less of a coincidence and more of a fact at this point of time that the Chinese were conducting biological weapons testing in that lab also, because it was linked to certain programs that China was conducting during last few years. Now, this is where a lot of the problem lies in. The author suggests that it is difficult to distinguish between a naturally occurring event, an accidental release of a genetically modified pathogen, or its deliberate use. So you cannot say that whether the transmission has taken place due to an accidental leak from the lab itself. You cannot prove it, because though there are suspicions, it is the responsibility of the institution and the country from where it is operating to establish the facts. In this case, the institution which people are saying is responsible for the leak of the virus from the lab is the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the country from which it is operating is China. And we very well know what the Chinese stand is. China vehemently opposes to further investigations, and they are suppressing the facts from getting out of their hand. They are sticking to their narrative, and they have denied to share data that is related to this research, and they have went to such heights that the people who were actually working in the lab are no longer on public domain, meaning they have disappeared completely. And when one doctor who tried to warn the people and countries around the world using the social media platforms, who contracted the virus and he was in hospital, but I think he was declared a hero by people themselves, but the Chinese government came down heavily on him, and he paid the ultimate price by dying or succumbing to the virus itself. He warned that there is a new strain of SARS-CoV, and whatever we are seeing in Wuhan right now is a variant of SARS-CoV. When he tried to warn the world and the government of China, instead of supporting or instead of investigating into his claims, they chose to suppress his voice. While coming to the culpability of the World Health Organization, remember, I was speaking to one scientist who had links to World Health Organizations. His stance was particularly interesting. His stance was very simple. If it was not the World Health Organization, assume that whoever conducted the investigation, except let us say a X country conducted the investigation of the origins of coronavirus, and they came out with the report what WHO proposed. Meaning, if it wasn't WHO, if it was any other country who came out with the extremely unlikely conclusion to the origin of coronavirus, they would have been tried for war crimes. Meaning, whatever WHO done in this case amounts to or can be tried under war crimes. That is how significant lacking they are. That was his personal opinion, but I don't identify with that. Neither should you, if that is what you are into. But nonetheless, you can clearly say that WHO's culpability, their stance, their actions do not uphold the organization itself. They have been pretty opaque in terms of how they are operating, what were the parameters that we are considering for investigation, and even the team that was sent to investigate was filled with people who were proposing that the virus transmission took place naturally and not through lab leak. So again, it was a compromised investigation, and when the report came out, subsequently, you know how many countries voiced their opposition to the report, stating that whatever WHO report states is unequivocally infactual and a new investigation has to be done. And you have to understand that WHO at this point of time looks like an organization that needs some restructuring and revisions. But coming back to the virus leak aspect of the virus, the coronavirus escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology is in fact increasingly possible, according to this author, with new information that is coming out. Whether the leak was a negligent or a willful act can never be proven, but it is evident that the research at Wuhan Institute of Virology relating to the bioengineering of more lethal coronavirus variants has crossed ethical boundaries at this point of time. Now, the coronavirus research conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology for years is an example of science that has run amok. So, author suggests that whatever the research that these scientists were conducting in the Wuhan Institute of Virology has crossed the lethal ethical boundaries of science. They have complete disregard for the procedures that were set by the Biological Weapon Convention Agreement, and the ethical restraints that were supposed to be followed by the scientists or the organizations or the institutions were left to complete disregard, or any code of conduct for the scientists was also not followed. And since there has been no accountability for their actions, these types of lack of accountability, lack of ethical restraints, lack of coordination between institutions, and this opacity that countries and institutions adopt during the times of crisis are bound to threaten the very existence of humankind. That is why China's role requires closer scrutiny, according to the author. So this is about the lab leak theory and the new evidence that has emerged that conforms to the lab leak theory, whether willful or accidental. Moving on to the next article, recognizing sex work as work. Now, one of the critical or the moral arguments that we see regarding prostitution in India has been, most of it has been silent, but nonetheless it is an aspect of our society that as officers in future you have to deal with. So that is why I chose this article today, so that there are certain aspects of society or issues in society which are shunned, but nonetheless as officers you have to deal with them on a daily basis, because it is your job to protect the rights of every citizen. Now, coming back to the article, owing to the non-recognition of sex work as legitimate work, sex workers have mostly been kept at arm's length from the government's relief programs. That is the true case. Whatever the labor laws or the labor code that is extended to almost all forms of labor or work, that these programs or these laws are not applicable to prostitution or sex workers. Now, with the pandemic in full force, this is the author's opinion here. The author opines that with COVID-19, it has provided more reason to consider a long pending demand of sex workers in India, because discrimination of sex workers and guaranteed set of labor rights. So the author suggests that it is high time for the Indian government and Indian society to shun the discrimination against the sex worker, the government to decriminalize the sex workers or sex work as it, and guarantee them with labor rights. Coming back to the legal aspect of this prostitution in India, prostitution is not illegal as such directly in India. The law that we have in India is the Immoral Traffic Prevention Act, or the Suppression of Immoral Traffic in Women and Children Act, which was enacted in the year 1956. Subsequent amendments that were made the law and name of the act was changed to Immoral Traffic Prevention Act. What this act, if you go by this act, prostitution is legal, but the activities that surround prostitution are illegal, because the legislation penalizes acts such as keeping a brothel, soliciting in public place, living off the earnings of sex work, and living with or habitually being in the company of a sex worker. So it doesn't say that the activity itself is illegal, but the activity surrounding sex worker or sex work is completely illegal, punishable also. The problem with having a legitimate discussion about this issue or particular issue is the concept of morality creeps into the argument, which makes the argument itself untenable at points of time. Now, as I said earlier, the act has not only criminalized sex work but also further stigmatized and pushed it underground, thus leaving sex workers more prone to violence, discrimination and harassment. This has been the case that we have been seeing time and again, where women employed in sex work have been prone to high percentage of violence, high percent of discrimination and high percentage of harassment. And the act, according to author, also denies an individual of their right over their bodies. But when you observe the evidence, it clearly shows that many women choose to remain in sex work despite opportunities to leave after rehabilitation by the government or non-governmental organizations is provided. Despite having a way out of the way of their life, these women choose to stay in that profession. One of the key commissions that was employed, or at least suggested some changes as to how sex work have to be looked at from the lens of legislation, is the Justice Verma Commission. Because the Justice Verma Commission acknowledged that there is a distinction between women who are trafficked for commercial sexual exploitation and adult consulting women who are in sex work for their own volition. Meaning you have to clearly differentiate who are voluntarily doing on their own and who are being forced to exploit commercially. Now, the author suggests that it is high time for us to rethink sex work as a form of labor, where the government recognizes their work and guarantees them some basic labor rights and extend them some governmental programs which are not accessible to them right now. Now let us come to this has been the legislative aspect of it, the law aspect of it, the executive aspect of it, now let us go into the legal aspect of sex work. Now if you look at few judgments from various high courts and the Supreme Court, the judiciary is moving in a direction of recognizing sex work as a right to livelihood. Particularly the main case or the main cornerstone judgment of sex workers in India is the Budhadev versus State of West Bengal, which stated that sex workers have a right to dignity. Now as recently as September of 2020, the Bombay High Court said that the prostitution was not a criminal offence under the law. This is as recent as September of 2020, where the Bombay High Court observed that the prostitution was not a criminal offence under the law, and that an adult woman had the right to choose her vocation, and nobody has the right to deny that. And during that proceeding also, 3 women who approached Bombay High Court for relief through this, during that hearing they said that ordered the government of Maharashtra to release all 3 women sex workers who were detained at a state corrective institution in Mumbai. So from both the decisions, at least the recent one and the flagship one, you can clearly see that the judiciary is also of the opinion that you cannot control certain people's rights, their choice of vocation, meaning the choice to do certain work. Now it is time for us to rethink the legislative aspect of it also. The author suggests that the Parliament must look, or at least take a relook at the existing legislation and do away with victim rescue rehabilitation narrative. That is the law right now. If the police police arrest somebody on the prostitution charges, the post-arrest rehabilitative stance is that the person who is being solicited is a victim, they have to be rescued and they have to be rehabilitated. But evidence suggests that most of the women in the line of work or in that prostitution line of work do not think themselves as victims, and they tend to continue working in that field of work. Now during the crisis such as we are in right now, the authors suggest that it is high time for us to rethink as to how we look prostitution in India and how we look at sex workers in India. Moving on to the next article, government keen on implementing labor codes. So what are the 4 labor codes? That is, one is wage code, the second is social security code, third is occupational safety, health and working conditions code, and the final one is the industrial relations code. So the government of India last year brought in few labor codes which consolidated 44 labor codes into 4 codes. Now earlier, whenever a company was operating, they had to adhere to 44 labor codes which were overlapping one over the other, creating a lot of chaos and confusion in terms of implementing and in terms of adhering to them. After due considerations and validations and high percentage of participation from the industry itself, the government of India brought in 4 centralized labor laws. Now the government is finally implementing these 4 labor codes. The next article, Delhi variant 40% more transmissible. According to Britain's health secretary, he said that the Delta variant, which is fast becoming the dominant variant or the coronavirus variant in UK, is 40% more transmissible compared to the country's existing strains. So the Delta variant is the variant which was first noticed in India. Now we know that it has been transmissible, but this research or this data suggests that whatever the mutation that the Delta variants happen to be, it is far more transmissible than any other mutation in coronavirus strains. Moving on to the next article, Odisha's forest produce gatherers hit hard. So, for the second year due to coronavirus pandemic, the forest dweller across Odisha have been found to be deprived of the right price for the non-timber forest produce that was gathered by them. Now, due to the pandemic, the local economies across the country, as we know, have been disrupting. Now, the non-timber forest produce market in Odisha has also suffered due to the pandemic, because there was a clear case of absence of adequate buyers for this year, and the government procurement has also been delayed. Since last year, forest dwellers, especially tribals, could not get the price for their produce and failed to dispose of the NTFP stocks after a year also. Now the crisis seems to have taken a turn for the worse, because even the government procurement process has also been delayed. Generally, government agencies procure the non-timber forest produce at a set price and ensure that whoever are employed through this way of means are taken care of. Now, the TriFed, that is the Tribal Cooperative Marketing Development Federation of India. So, TriFed also promoted a platform called Van Dhan Vikas Kendra, which was introduced to create a market for minor forest produce while ensuring minimum support price for these products. But that also failed to take off, leaving these people who were, particularly the tribal communities, still vulnerable to the effects of pandemic. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা। বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি।